I was tapped out. All the money I'd made in the early 2000s was gone. I was highly leveraged, and it took 3 years to crawl out of that hole. If you look at the successes, almost always they involve community. Almost always they involve a brand that's built trust. And generally, there's some kind of moat in the product space as well, though not always. In a lot of cases, the trust issues can sort of become a moat in itself. The only way you're going to win in an operations game is you've got to find a way to get continuity with employees. Can't be turning over all the time. Raising kids is the hardest thing that any of us will do. I've always had a perspective that my job as a parent is to make them not need me anymore. In a lot of cases, that means I've come across too hard on them. My wife is extremely good at the soft side of parenting. If you're not aligned, you're going to have a lot of problems.
Hey, it's Andrew here, and welcome to the eCommerceFuel podcast, the show dedicated to helping 7- and 8-figure brand owners build incredible businesses and amazing lives. And today on the show, man, I really enjoyed this discussion. I mentioned this at the end of the episode, but it's one of the things I've come to appreciate deeply over the last couple of years. It's just very even-keeled, reasonable, deeply grounded people that have a lot of experience, are fun to talk to. And Greg Howlett is, man, just one of the people at the top of that list when I think of those criteria. He's been in the e-commerce game for, man, since 1999. One of our incredible ECF member, one of the most giving members of, past recent years in the community, and just has a wealth of experience. He's got a portfolio of businesses, he invests, and he takes a slightly different approach to business. And we cover a bunch of stuff. We talk about how some of the mistakes he made in the early days, how he almost went bankrupt, and how he was able to walk away from that. We get into the future of e-commerce and how he's differentiating his businesses, which is not the way you would expect going forward. And kind of he's got an interesting thesis, which I agree strongly with, about what is required for success in the future of e-com. We even get into parenting. I mean, he's got one of his daughters is managing one of, if not many, of his businesses. And we talk about raising kids, if they should, how you bring them into entrepreneurship, if you should, and just raising kids in general. And it's some of his thoughts about that over time. Anyway, it's a great episode. And we're going to kick it off with him buying back a business that he sold over a decade ago, and a pretty cool story, which we're going to get into right after this. Can you give people an overview of your portfolio, the businesses you're in, the niches you run? Because you have Wise Choice, which is kind of your portfolio of different companies. You also have Capacify. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, but give us kind of a top-down view of the business landscape for you, if you would.
So basically what we do, Wise Choice is a holding company for a lot of different DBAs, which basically in our world means domains. In the beginning, we were very diversified. Over time, we have narrowed our focus to only working with certain things. For example, we work with consumables, mostly in the world of health and beauty. But consumables is a big deal to us because we focus really hard on LTV. LTV is a big deal. In other words, getting that second order. It's our specialty. And so we look for deals along those lines. We avoid a lot of stuff these days that I would have probably taken on in the past. So really, we're focused on consumables in the world of health and beauty. And we run it all through Wise Choice, but there's a lot of domains. To be very honest, Capacify is my way to look for new deals. So in other words, Capacify is just, it's almost, how would you say it? It's like it's bait to bring people my way that we can either acquire or invest in. I'm not really a service provider or a traditional service provider, and I'm not consulting much. I'm looking more and more for win-win relationships. I use Capacify just to bring people our way. So really, Capacify is sort of our marketing arm to bring people towards us, where we can potentially help them with joint ventures or potentially acquisitions. Does that make sense? I know it's a little off the beaten path on how we do it.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and appreciate the transparency on it. But you built, speaking of businesses, congrats on buying back your business. I was reading, you posted a great thread in the forums about the business that you bought back, and it's super cool story.
Yeah, it was a really cool thing, and never thought I never thought that would happen. But when that deal comes along, you got to do it. It's the free roll, right? The 0% down, zero down deal. I had no choice but to buy it, and so we'll see what happens. We'll give it. It'd be a good project for Kelsey, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. So it is it's the old business. Do you disclose publicly what it is? If you don't, that's totally fine. Or what kind of niche, or if not, maybe not the name, but what kind of niche is it in?
It's in supplements, and it's Vitabase, but so Vitabase.com. It's a line of supplements that we came out with that's again 20 years ago, and so not much in it that we would consider unique. It's not Heart and Soil, for example. Well, not that they're that unique either. Now they've been knocked off by everybody, but it is I would call it a Me Too line. In other words, it's more of a private label thing as opposed to anything that we formulated special. But we grew it, and it grew well. And there's all kinds of opportunity. It's a branding deal, right? In the end of the day, it's all about branding. And so it grew well, but the new owner just sort of let it, they just didn't handle it well. And so the good news is there's pieces to pick up, but yeah, there's some work to be done.
And so you came back. When did you sell it?
2013.
Okay. So it's been like a decade, and you bought it back for like 10% of what you sold it for, and you pretty much seller financed most of it. I mean, you had a pretty sweetheart deal on this thing, right?
Yeah. So 0 down, basically so revenue's down 75%. So 90%, yeah, I got a 90% discount, but that's not quite as good when you consider 75% down in revenue. But yeah, I mean, I pay 5% of revenue. That's our deal until the money is paid. If I walk away, business fails or whatever, within 5 years, the rest of the debt is forgiven. And so it's almost not debt. It's almost just like a revenue share with the cap. So there's very little risk.
So this new business, what are a couple of things you're going to focus on doing now that you've got this business back 10 years later, revenues, kind of bleeding? What are your kind of high level action plans to kind of turn things around?
The product mix needs a lot of work. So they've missed a lot of opportunities in terms of new products that have hit the market or new things that are happening in the supplement space. So we'll be all over that. In general, the marketing has been not good. So in other words, they're using, for example, computer generated images from 2010, something like that, which actually existed. You could take a bottle and wrap it around, or take a label and wrap it around a fake bottle and so on. So they're using that kind of stuff, but it just wasn't very good. So we're going to have to focus on that. We're going to have to go back to the customers and win back their confidence, because there's been a lot of out of stock issues and other issues. The former owners, by the way, were great. They're great people. I love them to death, but they were very distracted. They had a lot of things going on, and there was just a lot of balls that were sort of dropped.
Man, well, and then are you plugging? I'm guessing you're plugging your existing team into this. Is this something where, I know you and your daughter Kelsey work together, you've got other people on the team. Is this something where you're able to? Because I think the dream for a lot of entrepreneurs is, oh, hey, there's this cool shiny object / amazing opportunity. I want to go identify it. I want to be able to come in, hand it off to my team with kind of like, here's the 5 things to get going after, and then check in on every couple of weeks on how it's going. Are you at a point where you can do that, have the infrastructure to do that? Or is this going to be more of a roll up your hands and really get after it, on your own?
I'll have to do some of it. But for me, this is a mentoring opportunity, especially with Kelsey. So I'll lean on her a lot for a lot of the work. The thing is, we've been doing their fulfillment now for 4 years. So they came back to us 4 years ago and asked us to take over fulfillment. So we already know their products. We're already fulfilling for them, or were fulfilling. We've taken over now as of a couple of weeks ago completely. But we're doing the fulfillment. And then also about, a year ago, they came to us and asked us to do customer service. So we're pretty much doing the operational stuff already. The product mix is going to be an opportunity for Kelsey. But yeah, in general, I can be fairly hands off on this one because it plugs into what we do really, really well.
Yeah. I love the part in your write-up where you mentioned just the value of trust and relationship built over time as an important element in getting this deal done and having the opportunity to buy this business at a fairly attractive price. Like you talked about, I think some of the things you mentioned, like you stayed connected with the buyer, over
Yes.
10 years, you were working together. He saw your track record of like following through with things. You just had a good long-term trusting relationship. And I thought that was a point that was easy to miss, but pretty poignant. I remember when I was going to sell one of my businesses, one of the buyer that I thought would make the most sense was one of my suppliers. And not only would they make, because they sold wholesale, but they also sold retail. They're actually a competitor. And so they had a built-in huge cost savings because they were selling so many of the products that they were fulfilling for us on the wholesale side. Immediately, if they bought the business, they would be selling at retail and capture an extra 15, 20% of margin, like day one, right? So it was like our earnings plus 30%, right? So they had an unfair advantage. And I remember pitching it to them, built the full model out, showed them the cost savings and everything. It was a home run. I would have made more money. They could have bought a below market asset given their position. And they weren't interested. And when I kind of inquired about it, I talked to the owner, and I'd never got to know the owner much. I got to know the GM really well. He was my main point. And the reason the owner wasn't interested was because he had sent an email to me years ago, and I had either not replied in the way he liked, or I hadn't replied fast enough, or maybe I didn't even reply because it fell through the cracks. And that one oversight cost me a ton of money in the deal, which otherwise would have gone through. So I thought, I don't know, it made me think of that, and also made me remember of like, we all know relationships are important, but I think we kind of forget that. And then you see a deal like what you did, and it kind of drives it home.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I wrote what I wrote in ECF, and I believe that. But on the flip side, I also see how I made some of the same mistakes like you're talking about as well. I haven't handled every single thing well through that process. I know the deal, like a lot of these deals back in 2013, it almost fell apart a couple of times when there were concessions asked for and so on. And I can remember getting really not good in terms of my demeanor and so on. And a couple of things about that. First of all, the owner, or the previous owner, the buyer back in 2013, had a lot of grace. He had a lot of grace, and he put up with me to some extent. So I'm not saying at all that I did everything perfectly. It's a two-way street. But yeah, in the end of the day, just staying involved in the business paid off in this case, imperfectly, but staying involved really did pay off. And we stayed friends. And that's a scenario that I actually never thought would happen. I thought when I sold the business that we would just, he would go do his thing, and I was going to put in my time in terms of training and then walk away. But they became friends after that. And then that created an opportunity 10 or 11 years down the road. So it is interesting how that happens. And in the end of the day, it's about the relationship.
Yeah. Well, congrats on the rebuy. And it seems like there's been a good number of people who have had the chance to rebuy their business. We talked about Catherine from Best Self on the podcast recently, and a handful of other folks. But it seems like with things getting a little harder on the e-commerce side, some of the Thrashios of the world blowing up and having, anyway, it's been interesting to see people have that opportunity, which is pretty cool. So congrats, and hope it goes well.
Yeah, I've noticed that. A lot of buybacks at good prices.
Yeah. I'm curious. So your daughter, Kelsey, works with you in the business. She manages a lot of facets of the business. I believe she manages you have a warehouse in Utah, or one of your warehouses in Utah. And I think she manages that in addition to doing a lot of other things. I'd love to hear, I think a lot of people listening, myself included, have kids. We want to give them well, first and foremost, before we get into kind of how that kind of has evolved over the years, that working relationship. When she was younger and you were an entrepreneur, did you want like, did you have a strong desire for your kids to be entrepreneurs? Because I mean, we talk about seeing a lot of recent buybacks. We've also seen in the forums, this month especially, we've had a number of people just kind of get real open and candid about how rough entrepreneurship can be. Like it's hard, and it's kind of been on, we've seen that firsthand through some pretty brave accounts of people, which is helpful to see because there's a lot of people struggling. But it's, I don't know if I necessarily would want entrepreneurship for my kids unless they really wanted it themselves, given some of the challenges. So I guess my question to you is, was it something you knew that you always wanted for Kelsey and or your kids, or did that develop kind of naturally? Was that something that she gravitated towards? Did you kind of push her towards that? And how did you think about that?
Well, to be very honest, initially, I just wanted free labor. And we had unlabeled product coming in the building. We needed it labeled. So the kids are over there in the warehouse labeling product. And so how did it come about? I have 4 kids, 4 children, all in that age range. Maybe 2 of them will become entrepreneurs. I kept all of them involved in the business, but I've never pushed them to become an entrepreneur because, as you're mentioning, it can be a tough go. And my experience has not always been wonderful as well. So with my kids, I used them I grew up on a farm, first of all, so I believe in work. I believe that kids should be working to a large extent. And I grew up on the farm working. When you live in the suburbs of Atlanta, you don't have a farm, so you have to come up with another way to manufacture work. That's one of the big benefits of being an entrepreneur. You have work in-house. So my kids were always working in the business. Eventually, I did start paying them. And then what happened was we sold Vitabase. My daughter and my other children were early teens, and we kept one little piece of business. I thought I was going to sort of retire. But we kept one little piece of business. It was generating maybe 10 orders a day. And I moved it into my basement. So we had this little one room in the basement where we had a little shipping operation going on. And I thought this is a great way for them to learn e-commerce. So they shipped 10 orders a day using ShipStation. And we had no ERP or inventory system. They just did it. And eventually that business started growing. And it overran the basement. And then eventually we bought a house down the street and converted that very illegally into another warehouse. And that went for a year. And then we moved into a real warehouse. And after that filled up, we opened another warehouse in not Salt Lake, but just south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And Kelsey just sort of grew with that. So she does manage both warehouses and our customer service now. But it all started just shipping 10 orders a day from our one basement room in our house. And I think that's just it's a natural growing process like any other business. And she loves it. So she's in it. Some of my other kids may not love it. They're in college now. 2 of them are in college studying finance. They'll probably go more corporate. And then I have one son in the Air Force, and he's in cybersecurity. I don't know where he's going to end up. But if they go entrepreneurship, I am happy. But yeah, I would not necessarily wish it on anyone. I think it's tough. It can be really tough at times. I certainly know that from personal experience.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a great segue. You had some real hard times kind of in the kind of mid 2000s, I think. I don't know if it was related to 2008, kind of the housing crisis and all the volatility we saw then in the markets and the economy. But yeah, talk about that. What happened then, if you would, and especially maybe with the backdrop of a family? Because I mean, if it sounds like you had, if I'm doing my math right, you had at least 2-3 kids, maybe under the ages of 8, and you add a family to the entrepreneurial mix, especially a young family when things aren't going well, and that just stacks even more pressure. So I'd love to hear kind of what happened during that period and how you were feeling and what you learned.
Yeah, so I started in 1999, and in 1999, as I like to say, a monkey could have made money on the internet. It was very, very simple in those days because there was no competition, very unsophisticated compared to 2024. And I saw immediate success. So as we all know, it's just like a gambler. if a gambler wins from the first hand, they're probably going to get overconfident, and long term, that's going to be the worst thing that ever happened to them. That was the worst thing that ever happened to me. So I made money up front. So I'm knocking down some serious cash, and I go into 2003. I'm overconfident, and I start making sort of bad decisions. And I can go through some of the thinking behind these decisions. But eventually I started Vitabase. In the early days, I had no concept of cash flow or cash management. I also thought that all my mistakes were, or all my decisions were going to be golden. So I was spending money like a drunken sailor. We were very diversified. In other words, if I saw a good idea, I threw it into the mix. So we're doing all these crazy things. For example, I know this sounds ludicrous, but I was running Vitabase. We were focused on Vitabase. And at the same time, I was trying to start an early version of Shopify. So I had a developer or two working on something that looked like Shopify. Nothing like Shopify is today, of course, but this was before there were those kind of solutions on the market. So I'm working on that. I'm also working on a download music site, which was sort of a competitor with Apple. So here I am. I'm in my little business, my little warehouse, and I've got all these weird things going on. They're not even connected. I spread very, very wide, making bad decisions. Money is just flying out. And then, of course, you have the housing crisis of 2008. And all of a sudden, as we're seeing today, creditors are getting nervous. They're pulling back loans. And I was highly leveraged at the time. Strangely enough, I never used leverage personally, but because I was so good at business in my mind, I was happy to take loans on the business side of things. So I'm highly leveraged. They're pulling back my lines, and I'm in a position where I'm basically carrying the business on credit cards. And it's one of those things where back in those days, you couldn't even pay credit cards online, at least not our credit card. So I was basically mailing a check for a couple $1,000s at a time, hoping that it would clear so I could buy more inventory, and getting worse and worse. And I had the Hail Mary mindset, which is the mindset, okay, my next big idea is going to be the one that gets us clear. You know, that's going to change. It's going to turn everything around. This is a classic entrepreneurial problem, right, that we have. We always think our next idea is the one that's going to fix things. I tried one Hail Mary after another for years. None of them were working. So here I am. I'm highly leveraged, out of money, spread way too thin, doing all these crazy unrelated things. And I remember, and I think it was 2009, around then, I was making no money. Basically, now that I look back on it, our family was probably living on debt, but debt from the business. In other words, it's sort of transferring out of the business. And that was how we were funding our lifestyle. And I was up in a hotel room, and I remember this really well. It was up in Washington, D.C., and I was sat in a hotel room, and I realized as I looked at numbers that unless we had a big sales day the next day, I wasn't going to be able to make payroll. In other words, I was tapped out. All the money I'd made in the early 2000s was gone. I was highly leveraged. That was all gone. So that was my moment where I decided things had to change. And for me, what had to change was I came back. I cut all the stuff that I quit trying to compete with Apple and iTunes. I quit trying to compete with Shopify. And we just went back to doing what we knew how to do, which was selling supplements online. And it took 3 years to crawl out of that hole. But we did. And I took the approach that we weren't going to declare bankruptcy. I could have easily declared bankruptcy and walked away, but I made a decision not to. We crawled out. It took years of pain, I think 2 to 3. But we were able to do it. We were able to reverse the situation. And again, we were able to sell that business eventually about three years later. But yeah, that's sort of the story. There's a lot of pain in that decade, a lot of bad decisions that in the long run, I would say amounted to a couple of MBAs in all things business.
What made you decide not to declare bankruptcy? Because it sounded like you didn't personally guarantee any of those loans. So you'd probably still have your house. The damage would be isolated to the business entity, I'm guessing, for at least to some degree. What made you decide to like muscle through it for 3 years, which is, I think a noble decision?
Yeah, it's not, I don't take credit for that, but I do think it is the right thing to do. And I try not to judge. I know people go about these kinds of things in different ways. And there comes a point where I don't know that there's any other option. There come situations where there is no way out. And those are really, really unfortunate. But there's two things that drove my decision. First of all, I was pretty sure that if I cut our business to the bone and focused on what we could do, I could crawl out. It would take years, but I could crawl out of it. And then the second thing is, I guess it just comes back to my worldview and the way I was raised, giving my parents credit for this, the idea that if you owe money, you pay it. And so I've always operated that way. If I owe money, I pay it. And I don't want to come across as holier than thou on this because, again, I know there are situations that are different. I'm working with somebody now that got into a situation that was considerably worse. And in her situation, absolutely bankruptcy is the way to go. But for me personally, in that situation, I just didn't feel it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's kind of this double-edged sword. Like, I think you're right. I think it is good to pay your debts, especially if you can see a way out. But also, I think the bankruptcy laws in America, we wouldn't have the entrepreneurial environment or outcomes or successes or culture we do around innovation if we didn't have bankruptcy laws. I think there's, it's a really interesting way it's been structured. And also even just the attitudes towards failure in America compared to other parts of the world from people I've talked to about are pretty unique, right? Like if you go out, where else, I think America's pretty unique in that you can go out and have a couple big failures as an entrepreneur and come up to bat a third time and win. And people don't hold the first two against you, or they don't shame you because of it. They admire the fact that you tried, which I think is it's a cultural thing that's pretty cool. How do you think, Greg, I mean, you've been in this game for a while. You've been there when the money was flush, right? From a marketing and a supply perspective and just a general game, like you said, it was so much, it was pretty easy to make money in the early 2000s to 25 years later, not, definitely more challenging, but you've still got, and I should have done this at the very top, kind of get an overview of all the different things that you have in your portfolio, because I know you have a number of different businesses. But how are you thinking about strategy now? Because the game has changed so much, even in the last 5 years. When you think about what your competitive strategy is for building and growing a business online that is defensible, has some kind of moat, and isn't just, trading return on ad spend on Facebook for today's sales, and if that dips down, then you're just kind of hosed. What are you really trying to emphasize to build a sustainable business right now?
Yeah, when I hear, first of all, I have a lot of empathy for people that are in our space that are depending on an hour by hour reporting out of Meta, right? That's a tough position to be in, especially if you are selling products that can be knocked off or imitated or counterfeited, or just God forbid, if you have no IP at all, where you're just selling sort of a private label type thing. I don't see a future for that business in the coming at all. I think it's gone. And that's something that was around for 20 years and you could actually be successful in that. But I don't see a future for that at all. From our perspective, in the end of the day, we are going to have to focus on things that allow customers to know us personally. In other words, for us, it's a personal brand, maybe not personal, but a corporate brand that is trustworthy. So in other words, people will come to us because they trust us. This is, by the way, ECF has been great to help me in this regard, because for a lot of years, I tried to be very anonymous and very corporate. In other words, I thought that credibility came with being big. And over the years, I can remember a talk a couple years back at ECF where somebody sort of changed my mind on that. And we actually started leaning into being small and having our own voice and building our own trust. And I feel like even if you're not small, being small or coming across as small is an important thing right now. If you look at the successes, almost always they involve community. Almost always they involve a brand that's built trust. And generally, there's some kind of moat in the product space as well, though not always. In a lot of cases, the trust issues can sort of become a moat in itself. And I'm thinking of, well, I can start throwing out examples, but in my space, which is supplements, in which you probably have 20 to 30,000 brands, in a lot of cases selling almost the same thing, because to be very honest, that's the truth. It is, in a lot of cases, the same thing. They're buying the raw ingredients from the same places and so on. The issue in the end of the day is going to be trust. And I think, though, when you look at the Temus and so on, all the stuff that's going on, and you have to take a very hard look at product mix at the beginning and see if it's something that's going to be defensible as well. If you can find a moat on product side, that's great. I think those moats tend to be falling pretty rapidly. For example, we obviously see a lot of competition from direct from Asia into the U.S. Selling direct. If you're selling something, you became the middleman. I think that opportunity is going to be gone. That margin is going to shrink to nothing and eventually disappear. So you'll see a lot of companies in the U.S. right now that are saying, okay, what can I do value add? What can I value add to a product? Maybe it's kitting or whatever, maybe it's customization. And I think that we are a couple of years away from that moat falling as well. Mm-hmm. So those opportunities will be gone. In other words, kitting can happen out of the U.S. just like in the U.S. Personalization can happen outside the U.S. So what matters in the end, I think in the end of the day, it's going to be about brand trust. And so that's really what our focus is on right now. Being small, not necessarily being small, but appearing small, having relationships with customers, really, really focused on that. And that actually has worked extremely well for us from the testing or the surveys and the discussions that we've had. Building brand loyalty, I think, is the end of has been a good goal. I will say this too: building brand loyalty means zigging while others are zagging, especially in regards to certain things like, for example, AI. We intentionally lean against using AI for content because if we do that, how are we different from everybody else? So we're careful with AI. We're careful with outsourcing customer service, for example, because we want people to have a great experience. So in some cases, we spend more money on those kind of things to help build the brand voice. And I think that works for us a lot. So we want to avoid anything that makes us commoditized. In other words, we want to focus on brand. Does that help answer that?
Oh,
I don't know.
No.
I talked a lot there.
No, absolutely. I think that was spot on. I 1,000% agree with you in terms of where I think e-commerce is going, and smaller, more trustworthy brands are going to be the ones that are going to win and stick around in the future. Can you talk a little bit about your newsletter that you write? Because you've shared this with me. I think there's something messed up because I tried to get on your list and I still have yet to see one. But from the way you described it, you started writing a really personal newsletter. I don't know, maybe it's once a week, but it sounds like it's really resonated with your audience. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach it, what you write about, and the reaction you've gotten from your customers?
Yeah, so the newsletter you're talking about, it's a newsletter that goes out every Monday, and I still write it personally. So it's a non-sales newsletter. So we moved away from selling. We moved more into education, and a lot of our marketing is very non-salesy. But it's just the design is how do we help customers have better lives? So we try to talk about things that are pertinent to customers, but not necessarily just about health. So I write about things that are, I wouldn't say they're not controversial. I stay away from, for example, anything that's religious or political. I know the leanings of our audience. In general, I just stay away from either feeding them red meat or making them upset. I stay away from all that stuff. but I try to look for areas of common interest that sort of would appeal to anyone over pretty much any, I don't know, worldview, religion, you name it. And there's a lot of those things when it comes down to it. I really believe that. It's really easy if you focus on watching cable news to think that the other side is very different from your side. But there are a lot of commonalities, I think, across anybody that lives, any culture that lives in the U.S. For example, child rearing is a great example of that. Child rearing, financial issues, aging parents, for example. We talk about personality issues, relationship issues. Anything from my perspective is how do we have our customers how can we help them live a better life? And so that's the focus of that newsletter. Our customers really, really like it. It is an authentic voice. Again, it's something that I write myself without help of AI or anything like that. And I think that's a really, really important part of what we're trying to do as a brand.
Yeah. How can people get on that newsletter? And I'm also asking selfishly for myself, is there an opt-in page, a website they can go to and sign up? How do you get on this?
Yeah, I'm going to check because I personally added you, Andrew, to that list.
I know. I'm not blaming you.
I would love to know. There's a sign up at Caring Sunshine, a sign up page. But I'm trying to think how to get it to because I don't know it off the top of my head. But you can actually get on it at Caring Sunshine. But I will make sure I'll check right after this and try to understand why you're not on that list. I'm not sure.
Every Monday, I'm like, is Greg gonna email me today? And every Monday, I end the day with just a little less pep in my step, not having heard
Mondays are hard enough, and here I am learning your Monday even more.
No, I'd love to read it because I have a lot of those same aspirations for stuff I'm trying to do too, and I think it's very cool. I'm curious, you mentioned when you bought back your old company that one of the things that led to that was you having the discipline to not take the bait on so many other deals you'd looked at, having been in the space for a period of time. I looked at probably 100 deals, or at least 50 to 60 for everyone I invested in. And what are your criteria when you were looking at deals that are coming through? Like you mentioned some of them, LTV, it sounds like the health and beauty spaces are niches you really like, LTV driving part of that. But what else do you really look for when you're thinking about buying a company or investing in a company?
It needs to be in our wheelhouse. So, in the past, I would have gone wide and, I was thinking wide. I would grow in revenue by going wide. When the reality is we have success when we grow deep. What do we do well? How do we do it better? So I'm looking for companies that will fit in with what we already do. That's number one. So the consumables, health and beauty is a sweet spot for us. The other thing that I look at is companies that need operational help, where there's an operational lever that can be pulled, especially in cases where marketing is strong, because our weakness probably is marketing. And so we're really strong on the back end. So if you find a company that's strong on the front in the marketing side, that's an opportunity where we can align our strengths with their strengths. So I would say those are the two big things. It needs to be something that works in our wheelhouse that we can plug into our warehouse. And then secondly, we really like to work with companies that have strong brands or are building strong brands, or at least have a plan to build a strong brand. So I would say those two things. After that, it's pretty much the normal mix of things that probably everybody is looking for in a business, that in terms of, well, maybe not everybody, but the things that matter. Strong P&L. We don't do turnarounds as a general rule, except I just made an exception with this deal that I just bought. But as a general rule, we're not going to do turnarounds because I don't want to work that hard. And so we're looking for strong P&Ls at a decent with a decent number. In other words, a realistic seller.
Yeah. And you do minority investments as well. It sounds like obviously you'll buy companies, but do you invest in minority e-commerce businesses too?
It's rare. but yes. So we would look for those deals and entertain those deals. It's not the big thing that we do. I see people that do that as especially. But yeah, we would do those kind of deals.
Interesting. Talk about Capacify a little bit. I know that it's not, it sounds like it's a way for you to connect with people who you potentially can invest or purchase, but you still are in that process helping people. Some of them, I'm sure not everyone's a great fit there, but you still end up kind of helping them and giving them guidance. And you had some kind of cornerstones of a philosophy that you developed. I got 3 of them here. One you said was become a destination rather than a stepping stone for your team in terms of building a culture. Rapid incremental improvements that add up over time, that kind of compounding. And then the make inventory a competitive advantage. The rapid incremental improvements, I think, is, definitely feel free to speak to it, but I think that probably is pretty clear to a lot of people, even if we underestimate the power of, small compounding changes to the business. Talk, if you would, a little bit though about like becoming a destination rather than a stepping stone from a culture. And also, what do you mean when you say make inventory a competitive advantage? How are you thinking about those?
Inventory, let's see. I guess I'll take on inventory first. So inventory, one of the things that you see in the e-commerce world is you see a lot of companies trying to get inventory off their plate. They're trying to pass on inventory. They stay lean. In some cases, as we all know, drop shipping was a big deal in the early 2000s, even up till 5 or 10 years ago. And the whole thing there was, how do I avoid taking on inventory? Well, we had lean, right? Lean manufacturing principles, which is based on don't get the inventory, you actually need it. Well, along came COVID and sort of blew up the whole model, right? So all of a sudden, supply chain issues are out there, and an old saying that somebody told me years ago came true, or it became very obvious: he who has the most inventory wins. And I think that's largely true in our space. He that has most inventory wins. Not always, but inventory, if you're smart, if you're buying inventory smart, it does become a huge competitive advantage. One of the things when we talk to companies, we realize just how little sophistication there is in buying decisions. In other words, you'll go into a factory sometimes or a warehouse, and they'll have, I'm not saying this is bad, but they'll draw a line on some kind of carton that contains products, and they'll say, when it gets below this line, we're going to reorder. And that sort of works. But there's a lot of opportunity in those kind of cases to come in and help them make better buying decisions. So they're maximizing. They're not running out of inventory. They don't have too much. So helping companies figure that out is really helpful, getting them to an optimal level of inventory. In some cases, it's just not necessarily carrying more, but being smarter about it. So it's, in a lot of cases, using forecasting or just the predicting that goes on. More sophisticated models than drawing a line on a carton. Again, nothing wrong with that. Lots of great companies operate that way to this day. But a lot of companies could do better. So inventory is a strategic advantage. Also means, in some cases, buying inventory. I'm trying to think of how to say this right. There are situations where you can obtain inventory to put your competitors at a competitive disadvantage. For example, if you knew there's a shortage of a particular raw ingredient somewhere, you could buy inventory and buy sort of corner the market. So that kind of thing comes into play as well. In terms of being a destination rather than a stepping stone, moving on to that, that's an employee issue. We all know the turnover that happens in operations. They tend to be low-paying jobs, and you have lots of turnover. You have the situation where people don't even show up. We had an employee ghost us a couple weeks ago, never showed up. Interviewed well, and then on the day they're about to show up, they were supposed to start. We never saw them. So we have that scenario going as well. The only way you're going to win, in my opinion, and keep your hair, not that I'm doing a great job, but the only way you're going to win in an operations game is you've got to find a way to get continuity with employees. Can't be turning over all the time. So that's got to be a huge, huge focus It's about pay, but it's about other things as well. You have to focus on building an environment with pay and comp and everything else where employees are going to stick around and be happy with you. So that's what I mean by that. It can't be, your business can't be, your warehouse should not just be a place where people come to leave in 2 weeks. Hopefully they're with you with years. In some cases, about building a structure where they can advance within the company. You sort of need that. It's hard for a small company to do that in a lot of cases, but that's the goal, to have that in place as well.
Yeah. The inventory side, just play a little devil's advocate. I can definitely see how it can be a huge competitive advantage. There were times when we would see like an exclusive product come out on the market, or one we knew our suppliers didn't have very much of. So we would buy all of it, knowing it might take us 6 months to sell, but it meant that everyone had to come to us to buy it because we had it cornered in the market for that SKU. But you can also get into situations where you've got way too much inventory. Like, I mean, post-COVID is a perfect example too, right? Like you mentioned, it caused problems, but then people overreacted on that philosophy, stocked up, and then they were sitting, their inventory turns dropped from maybe, 4 to 5, 3, 4, 5 to they were selling, maybe one, they bought so much. They were turning it maybe once a year or twice a year because they overcorrected on the backside of COVID. So how do you think about walking that fine line? Like you mentioned, of course, being more sophisticated than just drawing the line on the side of the pack. And hey, we're down to, 12 inches of SKUs here. Let's order more. How do you and your business think more, think in a more sophisticated fashion about how to stock up on inventory, but not let it burn you?
Obviously, it's challenging. The more data, obviously, you have, the better. I think almost any ERP or system will calculate velocity. So you have monthly velocity. You decide how much you need on the shelf in terms of how many days or months on the shelf. And you can follow those formulas. A large look back period obviously matters a lot. So if you got a year or more of data, you can predict, and you can use growth, put growth in there to help. So there's a lot of sophisticated things you can do that will help, but there's no way to eliminate risk completely. So, but I do think a lot of companies, first of all, need to acknowledge the risk. There is risk in running a business, and the risk of stock out is potentially worse than the risk of being overstocked. There's no revenue coming in when you're stocked out. So,
yeah, that's a great point. I want to ask you, kind of as we start wrapping up here, parenting. You've got 4 kids. It sounds like most of them, if not all of them, are out of the house. Grew up on a farm. Obviously, hard work is one of the values you tried to instill, and sounds like you did instill in your kids. A lot of people listening have kids still at home, myself included. What are some of the pieces of advice you have to parents trying to raise great, well-adjusted, independent, capable kids? What are the things? Obviously, there's a lot there. I think all parents second guess themselves, but what are 2 of the 3 things that I heard once too, that someone said, like, as a parent, you really don't know how well you did till they're like 40 years old, which is slightly terrifying, right? Because there's so much that, I didn't know really who I was at 22 years old. Definitely made a lot of mistakes. But anyway, all that said, I'm sure there's things that you really tried to emphasize and you've seen some degree play out or not. So what advice would you have for parents for raising kids? Because from the very little I've seen, it seems like you've done a really good job.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. This is actually one of the areas of life that I feel probably the most inadequate. And we all know this, and we know this. Raising kids is the hardest thing that any of us will do. And I very, very often feel like a failure. Not because my kids aren't great kids, because they are. They are good kids. But I still feel like a failure because I feel like I could have done more in this area. I'm sort of prone to beating up on myself anyway. Something I have to continually watch with myself. So it's hard for me to answer the question as any kind of parenting expert. I guess I'm a little hesitant to answer the question, but I will answer the question from the perspective of I'm not an expert. These are just opinions. But yeah, being very, very involved in being involved in their lives and helping them understand the value of work, I think has been a critical thing for us. I have always, for better or worse, I've always had a perspective that my job as a parent is to make them not need me anymore. So in other words, I want them to grow to be independent. The old adage about kicking them out of the nest. So I've always approached parenting from that perspective. In a lot of cases, that means I've come across too hard on them, which is, I guess, one of the best pieces of parenting advice I could give, especially if it's applicable, is marry somebody that can soften you up if you're too rough, or, in other words, look for somebody that can bring other strengths to parenting that you don't have. My wife is extremely good at the soft side of parenting, way more than me. So she's been really, really a huge asset in helping them on the other side. So some part of parenting is marrying well, to be very, very honest. I see that more and more the older I get. Marrying well is important, because if you're not aligned on parenting, you're going to have a lot of problems. I think that's one of the top 3 reasons couples actually divorce, is parenting, along with in-laws and money. So be careful with that. I would say, other than that, involvement is important. But man, Andrew, I feel like a failure in this area. One of the things I actually wrote in our newsletter about recently was the whole social media cell phone issue for kids. And that's something, for example, we wrestled with a long time. Should we get our kids cell phones? If so, what age? Should we allow them on social media? And man, it's just complicated out there. When do you do that? Do you withhold technology, which is the future from them because of their emotional and mental health and so on? Man, it's tough. I got to be honest. I'm sort of glad I'm through it.
What did you decide? What did you and your wife decide to do there on that front? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah. Our kids got cell phones at a fairly early age, probably around the age of 12. And if I'm being really honest, I see the drawbacks to that with my own children. Some of them are more involved in social media than others in ways that I would say is not necessarily healthy. I think social media in general sort of beats down the self-esteem of children. And that's a huge, huge thing, which I'll talk about that in a second in terms of confidence. But I think that if I had to do it again, I'd still do it the same way. I'd still give them cell phones. We did a lot of things. For example, the phones had to be in our room at night charging so they couldn't be on their phones. Because as you know, nowadays kids keep their phones under their pillow and feel obligated to get up and answer or to look at text and so on. It's crazy to me, but it's true. But yeah,
adults never do that. That's only kids. Adults are never like that.
Only kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine that, but yeah, apparently that's the thing. So yeah, I mean, I can't say that we did it well. There's dangers and pitfalls on both sides, but I probably would have to do it again the same way.
But so why do you say it's interesting to me that you kind of look back with a little bit of regret at 12, but then you also say you do it the same way. Why that combination? That seems slightly unusual.
Because first of all, if you go too far in the ditch, you got problems either way. If you turn your kid, if you live in a world without any technology at all, you're setting them up to fail, probably long term. If you give them too much, you're setting them up potentially to have a lot of issues long term, especially emotional issues. I think in general, kids very often can have a tendency to live in a virtual world instead of the real world. Mm-hmm. I think we all do. So obviously there's that problem too on that side. So I guess the reason I say that I would do it the same way, but I still have misgivings about it, is because I know there's damage to the way I did it. It's almost like you just have to pick the way that creates the least damage. And I wish there was, I just don't know that there's a perfect answer to that.
Yeah. Well, I know you beat yourself up a little bit about it, but again, from the limited amount I've seen, Kelsey seems like she's turned out to be a great entrepreneur, super capable woman, and don't know your other kids, but I imagine they're probably just as fantastic. So don't go a little easier on yourself.
I will. I'll try. It's hard, but yeah, I'll try.
Yeah. Well, if you could, right before we wrap up here, give people, put that net out there for Capacify. Who are you a good fit for? Who should reach out to you? What can you help them with? What kind of investments do you consider making? Tell people about that, please.
Yeah. So especially companies, I think companies that have a brand, so they have strong product development, maybe not even necessarily a great brand yet, but you have a strong product, mostly in the consumable space. So you're focused on LTV. Maybe you're not focused on it yet, but you realize that you need to be focused on it. But you feel that you're weak in operations. And by operations, I'm talking about everything from technology to warehousing and customer service. Those are the kinds of deals that make sense for us because we're very, very strong, again, on the operational side, less strong on product development, less strong on marketing. So we're looking for companies to partner with in that space. So if you have something that fits in that mold and you're interested, just reach out. You can reach out on Capacify.com.
Amazing. Is it Capacify.com? .com. Okay,
.co.
.co. I didn't want to. I didn't want to correct you. I was like, it's going to come across as a real jerky move if I correct him about his own website.
That's horrible. Yeah, this is how bad I am, Andrew. Yesterday, I was. We're living in a high rise in Atlanta right now, and I went yesterday down. I knew this microphone. As a matter of fact, I overnighted this here, and I knew it was down there. And I went down and said, I need my package from, and I gave her a number. She looked everywhere for that unit number. And then I went upstairs and realized I'd given her the wrong apartment number. And I live in this apartment. So, I'm in bad shape.
Well, you seem like you're holding it together pretty well from the outside. So no one's noticing. No one's except for the .com. Yeah. We got through that. We got through that.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. Well, Greg, thank you for coming on and talking. And more than just this interview and just discussion, which I really enjoyed. I just want to thank you for being such an amazing member of ECF. I mean, you have been prolific in your giving and your thoughtfulness and sharing different things to so many different members. You strike me. I've told you this before. You strike me as an incredibly reasonable person. And that's something that I have come to value more and more deeply over the last few years. It's just people that have good perspective, can see multiple sides of an issue, are grounded, that aren't easily inflamed. Anyway, I've always appreciated that about you. You've got a ton of experience that you share so generously, and it's just a pleasure having gotten to know you, and also getting to have you as a part of our community. So thank you for everything that you've added to it. It's really appreciated.
Well, thanks for the community. The community has been great. And just a little plug, I'll give you a little plug for ECF. So we entrepreneurs very often, especially in e-commerce, we have a tendency to, let's just say, hide behind our keyboards, right? And I think a couple of years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago, whenever I came to ECF, I sort of was realizing that was a big problem in my life. I was basically isolated from other companies, didn't even realize what was out there. And so joining ECF has been extremely, extremely valuable. The relationships have been great, but, and you say I've given, but I've received a ton of value from ECF over the years. It's been extremely good for me, extremely good for our business. So I appreciate you having that community.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, appreciate the kind words and appreciate being a part of it. And I'm headed over to your website to sign up for the caringsunshine.com. Is it .com or .co over at the Caring Sunshine?
I think it's
website.
.yy. Yeah. No, I'll hook you up on that, Andrew. It's interesting. I should have checked in with you on that.
Oh no. I just need more Greg in my life. So got to get that taken care of. So
yeah. No, I have that. We're off. You're just cutting and pasting anyway, but I'm going to look. Obviously we get records of everything. Maybe who knows what's going on with that. I'll figure it out.
Yeah. We'll look forward to it. Well, thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
This has been a ton of fun.
Yeah. Good to talk to you.